Lecture 9. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Virtual University's course on Business and Technical Communication. In today's lesson, we will continue looking at the 7 C's of effective communication. In the previous lesson, we looked at completeness and conciseness, and in today's lesson, we will look at consideration and concreteness. In this lecture, you will learn to see your material from your reader's point of view. This means that you will learn to see if your material that you are using, if that is acceptable and comprehensible to your reader or not. A lot of the times, what we write is comprehensible to us, but it might not be comprehensible to our reader. So we have to look at it from the reader's point of view as well. You will also learn that you is more desirable than I or we in most instances. A lot of the time when we are writing for technical communication, we use the pronouns I and we. However, it is more desirable to use the pronoun you because you are addressing the reader, and it is important to keep the reader in mind and to let the reader know that he or she is important. Also, we will learn that readers like to see these benefits. They like to be addressed directly, and they like you to read the material from their point of view. So you need to show that these benefits are a prominent part of your message. You will also learn to consciously use positive words rather than negative words in your communication. You will also learn if you were precise in using facts and figures whenever possible. A lot of the times you are using facts and figures in your communication, in reports, in presentations, etc. And you need to check if you were precise in the facts and the figures that you were using. This is very important so that you do not give the wrong message across. We will also see if you were using active voice more than the passive voice. We've talked about this previously, very briefly, that it is better to use active voice rather than passive voice in a lot of cases, because the passive voice makes the message a lot more complicated. Also, we will look at action in verbs and see if the action is in verbs rather than in nouns, and also check if you try occasionally using vivid image building words. However, you need to be careful when you're using these vivid image building words in business communications. You cannot use them too frequently because then it makes the message too colorful, and you might not always want that. One main C of business communication is consideration. Consideration means preparing every message with the message receiver in mind. We talked about this earlier where we said you need to keep the reader in mind. And this is really what consideration is. You need to keep not only yourself in mind because you are the one who's writing the message, but you need to keep, more importantly, you need to keep the reader in mind because it's the reader who needs to understand your message. You need to be sure that you don't lose your temper in your message, you don't accuse, and you don't charge your reader without facts. A lot of the times when we are writing a negative message or when we are replying to a message which might not be very pleasant, we need to be careful that we do not resort to these things. बहुत इस तरह के मैसेजेस होते हैं जो बहुत पॉजिटिव नहीं होते, और उसमें हमें बहुत ख्याल करना है कि हम कोई भी ऐसी बात ना कहें जो कि रूडनेस में शुमार हो और जिसमें हमें लगे या जिसमें रीडर को ख़ास तौर पे लगे कि आपको किसी बात पे गुस्सा है या आप उनके साथ रूड हो रहे हैं. Consideration also means that you are foremost aware of the desires of the reader, their problems, their circumstances, emotions, and probable reaction to your thoughts. Now, probable reactions means that you need to be aware of how they will react when they read your message. जब आप एक पैगाम लिख रहे हैं, आपको ये ध्यान में रखना है, ये सोचना है कि ये पैगाम जब पढ़ने वाला पढ़ेगा तो उसका इसके ऊपर क्या मद्देनज़र होगा और वो इस पैगाम को पढ़ के किस तरह रिएक्ट करेगा. ये बहुत ज़रूरी है और यही सबसे अहम बात है कंसिडरेशन की कि आपने दूसरे का एहसास किया. कंसिडरेशन तो एहसास ही है. You also need to consider that you need to handle the matter from the reader's point of view. And this thoughtful consideration is also called the you attitude, the human touch or understanding human nature. The you attitude means that the writer is thinking of the reader and he is telling the reader that you, the reader, are more important than I, the writer. There are three specific ways to indicate consideration. The first, as we said earlier, you need to focus on you instead of I or we. You need to show audience benefit or interest in the receiver, and you need to emphasize positive, pleasant facts. पॉजिटिव प्लेजेंट फैक्ट्स एम्फोसाइज करने का मतलब ये है कि जो अगर कोई बात ऐसी है जो नेगेटिव होगी मैसेज में, उसको हम थोड़ा इतनी क्लियरली ना नेगेटिव कहें, लेकिन उसमें जो पॉजिटिव बातें हैं हम पहले वो ज्यादा एम्फोसाइज करें. नाउ लुकिंग एट द फर्स्ट, फोकसिंग ऑन यू इंस्टेड ऑफ आई और वी. Using you does help project a you attitude. You need to use the word you and target the reader more consciously, more directly, so that the reader feels more important and the reader knows that you have kept them in mind when you have been writing the message. However, overuse of you can lead to negative reaction, especially if the message that you're giving is negative. If you are using you too much to portray a negative message, it can seem accusing. So you need to be careful. बहुत हर चीज में हम आप करके अगर कहेंगे और हर बात जो है वो हम रीडर को ही के ऊपर डालेंगे, तो वो कभी हो सकता है कि उसका एक असर जो है वो इतना फेवरेबल ना हो. तो इसलिए हालांकि हमने यू को यूज करना है, लेकिन इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि हम हर वक्त ही यू को यूज करें. हमें उसमें आई और वी भी मिलाना है, लेकिन यू को ज्यादा एम्फोसाइज करना है क्योंकि जो रीडर है वो ही उसको पढ़ेगा, वही ज्यादा अहम है हमारे से. इसी बात को आगे लेके चलते हैं. फोकसिंग ऑन यू इंस्टेड ऑफ आई और वी, यू नीड टू क्रिएट कंसिडरेट ऑडियंस ओरिएंटेड मैसेजेस and focus on how message receivers will benefit, what they will receive, and what they want or need to know. This again is an important consideration. You need to know and you need to show the reader that you are aware of their needs and their perceptions. आपको ये अंदाजा है कि वो क्या सुनना चाह रहे हैं, वो क्या पढ़ना चाह रहे हैं, और आप उस हिसाब से आपने जो अपनी कम्युनिकेशन है वो आपने उस हिसाब से लिखी है. In some cases, this focusing on the benefits of the message receiver and what they will receive can be accomplished by emphasis. You may downplay your own feelings to make a point. This basically means that you may emphasize on certain points which will be favorable to the reader and downplay other points. For example, the we attitude would be, I am delighted to announce that we have extended our office hours to make shopping more convenient. Now, in this sentence, there is emphasis on I. I am delighted. मुझे खुशी है या हमें खुशी है. However, अगर हम इसी को you attitude से लेंगे, तो it will become, you will be able to shop evenings with the extended office hours. Okay, so now instead of saying we have decided, you are saying you will be able to do this. तो इसमें हमारा decision कम हो गया, लेकिन जो reader है उसके लिए जो बेहतरी है, उसको जो फायदा है, हमने उसको emphasize कर दिया. Another example, the we attitude, we are sure you must be frustrated by the length of time to ship your documents to Australia. And the you attitude for the same thing would be, the documents will be reaching Australia within a week. Now, in this example, we have taken away all pronouns. There is no I, there is no you. And it is merely stating that the documents will be reaching Australia at a certain time. This lays more emphasis on the action of what is going to happen rather than on the writer or the reader. Now, in this example, we have taken away all pronouns. There is no I, there is no we, there is no you. It's merely stating that the documents will reach Australia at a specific time. The emphasis here is more on the action rather than the feelings of the people, because they are not important. It's not important whether we are aware that the person will be frustrated or not. What is more important is what will actually happen, because we are aware that the reader is more concerned with having the documents reach Australia in time. तो इसलिए बहुत बार ये होता है कि हम I और you दोनों हटा देंगे और जो एक्शन है हम उसके ऊपर एम्फसाइज करेंगे, क्योंकि जो रीडर है वो उस एक्शन के ऊपर बात पूछ रहा है या वो उस एक्शन का नतीजा मांग रहा है. तो इसलिए हमें I या you दोनों लगाने की जरूरत नहीं है. Showing consideration for the audience involves more than just using you instead of I or we. Messages that use we can be receiver oriented if we includes the receiver of the message. बहुत बार ये होता है कि जो we है उसके अंदर हम जो receiver है उसको अपने साथ शामिल कर लेंगे. When we are saying we don't necessarily mean just we who are on the side of writing, but we can mean you and I. हम जब कहते हैं हम, उसमें ये भी हो सकता है कि हम एक साइड पे सारे हैं, या हम ये हो सकता है कि हम में मैं भी हूं और आप भी हैं. तो इसलिए we can use we in that sense to include the receiver instead of using you all the time. Sometimes avoiding you can reduce potential defensiveness or allow the recipient to save face. This basically means that if we are using you too much, then it might seem accusing to the reader or it might put too much responsibility on the reader. तो इसलिए अगर हम you का इस्तेमाल थोड़ा कम कभी कभी करें तो उसमें रीडर के ऊपर से रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हट जाती है. और ये जो डिसीजंस हैं कि हमने I इस्तेमाल करना है या you इस्तेमाल करना है ज़्यादा, ये जो जाहिर है जो मैसेज है उसके कंटेंट पे डिपेंड करता है कि उस मैसेज में हम क्या देना चाह रहे हैं और किस नौयत का मैसेज है. An extreme example of a negative situation is the collection letter with you or your in almost every sentence, if the sentences are insulting, sarcastic, tactless or untrue accusations. Now, for example, if you are a collection agency, for example, you are sending a bill to somebody and they haven't paid the bill, and now you are going to be sending a letter following that bill saying that you haven't paid. If you are emphasizing too much on you, then it will seem very negative and it will seem very accusing and tactless कि आपने ये नहीं किया, आपने पैसे नहीं अदा किए, आपने बिल नहीं पे किया. तो इसलिए इस टाइप के केसेस में बेहतर है कि you का इस्तेमाल कम किया जाए. The you in negative situations can be avoided by employing passive voice and making the receiver part of the group. पैसिव वॉइस, जैसे हमने पहले कहा था कि जो बात एक है उसको इतनी डायरेक्टली एक्शन में ना की जाए, लेकिन उसको जरा इन्वर्ट करके, उल्टा करके बात की जाए. और इसमें ही पैसे, इंस्टेड ऑफ सेइंग यू हैव नॉट पेड द बिल, यू कैन से द बिल हैज नॉट बीन पेड बाय यू. तो उसमें जो एम्फोसिस है वो यू पे से हट जाता है और बिल के ऊपर आ जाता है. या आप ये कह सकते हैं वी हैव नॉट रिसीव्ड द बिल. तो उसमें फिर एम्फोसिस जो बिल अदा करने वाला था उसके ऊपर नहीं रहता, लेकिन एम्फोसिस फिर आपके ऊपर आ जाता है कि आपको नहीं बिल मिला. बात वही है लेकिन जरा अक्यूजिंग कम लगती है. इसमें यह नहीं लगता कि आप अगले को कसूरवार ठहरा रहे हैं, हालांकि बेशक कसूर अगले का ही, दूसरे पढ़ने वाले का ही हो. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, एन इंटेंसिव वे ऑफ सेइंग something might be you failed to enclose your check in the envelope. Now this seems very intense, it seems very accusatory कि आपने चेक नहीं डाला, आपका कसूर है, आपने इस तरह आपने पढ़ने वाले को कसूरवार ठहराया है. लेकिन अगर आप इसको दूसरी तरह कहें तो you can say in a considerate way, you can say the check was not enclosed. This is passive voice. Another way would be the envelope did not have a check in it. This is a depersonalized way of saying it. इसमें कोई किसी भी इंसान के ऊपर इशारा नहीं है, बस आप ये कह रहे हैं कि इस लिफाफे के अंदर चेक नहीं था. उसमें किसी का भी कसूर हो सकता है, लेकिन आपने उसमें किसी के ऊपर इल्जाम नहीं लगाया हुआ. Another example would be an intense way of saying it would be your contract tells you plainly that, for example, you need to give 1 month's notice before you leave the job. And a more considerate way would be, I am always happy to discuss the contract terms with new employees. Now in this, the receiver becomes part of a group. When you're saying, I am happy to discuss terms with new employees, then the receiver is part of the group of new employees. And therefore, he does not seem to be standing apart as a single person who is on one side with the organization on the other side. So इसलिए बहुत बार ये होता है कि आप यू कहने के बजाय आप जो रिसीवर है उसको एक ग्रुप का हिस्सा कर देते हैं ताकि वो अपने आप को इतना अकेला ना महसूस करे. In another example, you are completely off base in your proposal. Off base का मतलब कि आप बिल्कुल पॉइंट से हट रहे हैं, या आपने जो बात अपनी बतानी थी वो बिल्कुल गलत है. और इसी को कहने का कंसिडरेट तरीका एक ये होगा, we have different interpretations of the utility of the proposal. This is sender oriented, with acceptance of responsibility. Now, this basically means that the sender, the person who is writing the message, is saying, fine, what you have said, we might not agree with it, but it's not necessarily because what you have said is wrong. It can also be because we are interpreting it in a different way. ज़रूरी नहीं है कि जो आपने बात कही है उससे हम सहमत हों, और ये भी ज़रूरी नहीं है कि जो आपने बात कही है अगर हम उससे सहमत नहीं है तो वो बात गलत है. इसका ये भी मतलब हो सकता है कि हमारे जो हैं हमारे व्यू पॉइंट्स फ़र्क हैं. आपकी भी बात सही हो, हमारी भी बात सही हो, और उसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन फ़र्क है. हम उसको किसी और तरीके से समझ रहे हैं, आपने किसी और तरीके से समझा. ये बेसिकली जो रिसीवर है उसको एक फेस सेविंग का भी मौका दिया जाता है इस तरह बात ज़रा सी ढांप के करके. बेशक उनकी बात गलत हो, लेकिन उनको बजाय ये कहने के बात गलत है, अगर आप इस तरह कह दें तो थोड़ी सी उनकी शर्मिंदगी कम हो जाती है. Another way would be to say that the proposal plan has 3 aspects that need clarification. Now in this, even if you have found the proposal plan to be off base, you're not saying that directly. You're basically asking for clarification. This way, the reader gets to give some clarification. The reader gets to explain their viewpoint without feeling that they have been accused of being wrong. Another way of showing consideration is that you show audience benefit or interest in the receiver. The first way of showing consideration we said was to use you more than I or we, and the second way is to show audience benefit. Readers may react positively when benefits are shown to them. Whenever possible and true, show how your receivers will benefit from whatever the message asks or announces. Now, obviously, if you are asking for something in a message, or if you are announcing something, maybe a new product, you need to show your readers how they will benefit from buying that product, or how they will benefit from coming to your company or dealing with your company, instead of showing them how you will benefit. For example, if you read an ad in a newspaper advertising computers, you are more attracted to the fact that those computers will benefit you, rather than being attracted to the fact that the sale of those computers is going to benefit the company. आप जब एक चीज़ खरीदने जा रहे हैं तो आप अपने फ़ायदे के लिए ख़रीद रहे हैं एज अ रीडर. आप जब एक इश्तिहार पढ़ रहे हैं या कोई एक लेटर पढ़ रहे हैं तो आपको उसमें अपना फ़ायदा चाहिए. आपने ये नहीं देखना एज अ रीडर, आपको इस बात से कोई इतना ख़ास मतलब नहीं है कि जो कंपनी है उसको कितना फ़ायदा हो रहा है. आप तो ये चाहते हैं कि आपको फ़ायदा हो. इसीलिए इसी तरह जब आप ख़त लिख रहे हैं तब भी आप ये सोचिए कि जो रीडर है आप अपने आप को उसके जगह रखें और ये सोचें कि उसको किस तरह फ़ायदा आप ये दिखा सकते हैं कि उसको फ़ायदा हो रहा है, ताकि वो आपका प्रोडक्ट ख़रीदने में इंटरेस्टेड हो, आपकी कंपनी के साथ डील करने में इंटरेस्टेड हो, या जो भी आपकी सिचुएशन है उसमें आपकी जो कम्युनिकेशन है वो अपने लिए वो बेहतर समझे. The benefits must meet recipients' needs, address their concerns, or offer them rewards. Now, in whatever way, depending on who your audience is, the benefits that you are going to be showing in the letter should match the type of audience that you're catering for. You need to keep their needs in mind. You need to keep their concerns in mind. अगर आपका जो लेटर है वो किस ऐसे ऑडियंस को जा रहा है जो बड़ी उम्र के हैं, तो उनके लिए जाहिर है आप फिर उस हिसाब से उनके कंसर्न्स, उनकी नीड्स देख के आप उनके लिए बेनिफिट्स जो हैं वो उस लेटर में लिखेंगे. आप जाहिर है उसमें वो बेनिफिट्स नहीं लिखेंगे जो एक 6 साल के बच्चे को अट्रैक्ट करेंगे. तो इसलिए आपने अपने ऑडियंस को भी दिमाग में रखना है और आपने ये भी सोचना है कि उनकी नीड्स और उनके कंसर्न्स क्या हैं. उस हिसाब से उनको आप जो भी ख़त लिखेंगे या जो भी कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस करेंगे या एडवर्टिजमेंट होगा या रिपोर्ट होगी या प्रपोजल होगा, वो उसके हिसाब से होगा, कीपिंग इन माइंड कि उस ऑडियंस को क्या चीज़ अट्रैक्ट करेगी. नाउ ऑल्सो यू मस्ट कीप इन माइंड दैट व्हाट यू ऑफर must be perceived as benefits by the receiver. A lot of the times, what you're offering, you might think, oh, this is a very good benefit for my reader, but the reader might not be looking at that as a benefit. इसलिए ज़रूरी है कि आप ये भी ख्याल करें कि जिसको आप बेनिफिट समझ रहे हैं उसको आपका रीडर भी बेनिफिट समझ रहा है या नहीं. जिस चीज़ को आप मुफीद समझ रहे हैं उसको पढ़ने वाला भी मुफीद समझ रहा है या उसके लिए वो उस चीज़ की कोई मायने नहीं है. You must identify legitimate benefits of your position, policy or product and then put yourself in the place of the receivers to assess their perspective. As I said before, see if the benefits are legitimate, see if the benefits are attractive enough and then put yourself in the position of the reader. अपने आप को उस रीडर की जगह पे रखें और ये सोचें कि ये बेनिफिट्स इस वक्त आप तो ये बेनिफिट्स अनाउंस कर रहे हैं या आप ये कम्युनिकेशन कर रहे हैं जिसमें आप इस तरह लिख रहे हैं कि ये चीज़ अट्रैक्टिव लगे, लेकिन ये इस वक्त आपको अट्रैक्टिव लग रही है, ये पढ़ने वाले को भी क्या अट्रैक्टिव लगेगी या नहीं लगेगी। और ये आपको जाहिर है उस पढ़ने वाले की पूरी बैकग्राउंड और प्रोफाइल कि वो कौन है और वो ये कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस क्यों पढ़ रहा है, ये सोच के ही आपको पता चलेगा। The receivers will be more likely to react favorably and do what you suggest if you show that the benefits are worth the effort and cost you ask them. Now, obviously, if you are going to be announcing, for example, a new product, then the readers or the audience will only be interested in that new product if they show that it is worth it or if they know that it is worth it. Your product then has to be attractive to the person who is buying that product, and therefore the communication that you are sending out with that product or in relation to that product should announce those benefits, and the reader should be able to see clearly that those benefits do exist. अगर आपने उन बेनिफिट्स को, जो भी आप बेनिफिट उस रीडर को दे रहे हैं, आपने एक नई पॉलिसी बनाई है, आप इंश्योरेंस कंपनी में काम करते हैं और नई आप उसके बारे में कोई पॉलिसी है, या कोई आप गाड़ियां बेच रहे हैं उसकी कोई पॉलिसी है, receivers will be more likely to react favorably and do what you suggest if you show that the benefits are worth the effort and cost you ask them. Now, obviously, if you are writing a proposal for your employer, then and the employer is the audience and the receiver in this case, then they are more likely to react favorably if whatever you have requested in your proposal, whatever benefits you have asked for or whatever changes you want made in the company, and you feel that there will be benefits for the company, if they seem to be favorable and if they seem to be cost effective. अगर आप अपनी कंपनी में कोई भी चेंज लाना चाह रहे हैं और आपने अपने बॉस के लिए एक प्रपोजल उस हिसाब से लिखा है, तो जब तक आपके एम्प्लॉयर को, आपके बॉस को उसके फ़वाइद नहीं नज़र आएंगे कि वो चीज़ कितनी मुफीद है, वो उस पे एक्ट करने के लिए तैयार नहीं होगा। इसलिए ये ज़रूरी है कि वो बेनिफिट जो हैं वो उनको भी अपने फ़ायदे में नज़र आएँ. In situations where actual direct benefit is impossible or irrelevant to the subject matter, the message should at least show concern for the recipient. There are many situations where you will not have direct benefit, but at least then you can show that you have concern for the reader. ज़रूरी नहीं है कि आप उसमें उनको कोई बेनिफिट ही हो रहा हो, लेकिन कम से कम अगर उनको ये अंदाज़ा होगा कि हाँ, आप जो उनको से कम्युनिकेशन कर रहे हैं उसमें आप उनके लिए भी कंसर्न हैं, तो वो भी आपके लिए फेवरेबल है एज अ राइटर. Also, merely inserting the word you does not ensure the you attitude as shown in this sentence. You will be glad to know that we now have a walk-up window open 7 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 5 p.m. every weekday. Now, you might be announcing something. You might say, we have a window, or we have a walk-in window or a counter open from this time to this time. But a lot of readers might say, so what? The fact that you are using you does not mean that you have actually highlighted the benefit that the reader will get out of what you are announcing. Another way to show consideration is to emphasize pleasant and positive facts. This means stressing what can be done instead of what can not be done. अगर हम हर चीज़ के लिए नेगेटिव चीज़ बताएंगे कि नहीं ये काम इस तरह नहीं हो सकता, तो जाहिर है वो इतनी प्लेजेंट बात नहीं है. However, अगर आप ये कहेंगे कि जी ये प्रॉब्लम ये है, लेकिन ये इस तरह, इसका हम सोल्यूशन इस तरह कर सकते हैं, या ये प्रॉब्लम है और इसको हम इस तरह टैकल कर सकते हैं, और वो आप अपनी कम्युनिकेशन में लिखेंगे या बताएंगे, तो वो जाहिर है ज़्यादा पॉजिटिव है. दूसरी जो थी वो नेगेटिव थी. तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप जो भी पॉजिटिव बात है उसको स्ट्रेस करें और नेगेटिव बात को इतना स्ट्रेस ना करें. उस नेगेटिव बात के सोल्यूशन को स्ट्रेस करें जो कि फिर पॉजिटिव है. Also, you must focus on words your recipient considers favorable. A lot of the words you might be considering favorable, but the recipient might not consider them favorable. So please focus on words that you feel that the recipient will find favorable. An example of emphasizing positive, pleasant points: it would be negative to say it is impossible to open an account for you today. A positive way of saying it would be, as soon as your signature card reaches us, we will gladly open an account for you. जो पहली बात थी उस जिसमें आपने कहा कि इट विल बी इम्पॉसिबल टू ओपन एन अकाउंट, उसमें जो आपका क्लाइंट है उसको ये लगेगा कि आप तो ये काम करना चाह ही नहीं रहे हैं, या ये बहुत ही मुश्किल है और ये नहीं हो सकता, और वो शायद किसी और बैंक में चले जाएं अपना अकाउंट खुलवाने के लिए। लेकिन अगर आप उनको सोल्यूशन बताएंगे और बेसिकली आप ये बताएंगे कि आज उनका अकाउंट क्यों नहीं खुल सकता, तो वो ज़्यादा इफेक्टिव कम्युनिकेशन है। वो फिर उस पर वो एक्ट कर सकते हैं और उनको ये फीलिंग होगी कि हाँ जी, आप उनके लिए ही इंसान हैं और आप उनको एक सोल्यूशन दे रहे हैं जिस पे वो एक्ट कर सकते हैं। ऑल्सो अनदर एग्जाम्पल, वी डोंट रिफंड इफ द रिटर्न्ड आइटम इज सॉइल्ड एंड अनसेलेबल। बेसिकली इसमें आप ये कह रहे हैं कि हम कोई अपनी बेचा हुआ माल वापस नहीं लेते अगर वो माल जो है वो खुल गया है या ख़राब हो गया है या बिक नहीं सकता। तो इसमें आप जो अपना क्लाइंट है उसको एक डायरेक्ट रिफ्यूज़ल कर रहे हैं कि हम ये चीज़ नहीं ले सकते। जो इसका पॉजिटिव होगा वो होगा, वी रिफंड व्हेन द रिटर्न्ड आइटम इज क्लीन एंड रीसेलेबल। रादर देन गिविंग द नेगेटिव थिंग्स सॉइल्ड एंड अनसेलेबल, यू विल से वी विल रिफंड, वी विल हैप्पीली रिफंड व्हाट यू वांट टू रिफंड, but only when it is clean and we can sell it again। चीज़ वही है, दोनों में आप रिफ्यूज़ल कर रहे हैं कि ये चीज़ साफ नहीं है, इसको हम बेच नहीं सकते। लेकिन जो दूसरा वाला है उसमें आप ओपनली ये नहीं कह रहे कि आप जो प्रोडक्ट लाए हैं इसको आप ख़राब करके लाए हैं, लेकिन आप ये कह रहे हैं जी हम ज़रूर लेंगे, लेकिन जो चीज़ साफ होगी हम उसको लेंगे, बजाय इसके कि आप ये कहें कि ये तो मैला है। Another case of saying something negatively would be, when you travel on the company expense, you will not receive first class fare. This might be something that is obvious to a lot of people, but if you say it this way, it sounds very negative. A positive way of saying this would be, when you travel on company expense, your approved fare is not for tourist class. The positive way of saying this would be, when you travel on company expense, your approved fare is for economy class. Now in this, by saying the approved fare is for economy class, basically you are telling the reader what benefit he has. You are saying the benefit you are getting is that you are getting fare for economy class. Whereas in the other way of saying it, you were saying that you are not getting the benefit of traveling first class. तो जब आप बेनिफिट दे रहे हैं तो फिर बेहतर है कि बेशक वो बेनिफिट कम है, फर्स्ट क्लास नहीं है, इकोनॉमी क्लास है, लेकिन उस बेनिफिट को जिसको आप दे रहे हैं आप उसको एम्फसाइज करें, इस बात को एम्फसाइज ना करें कि जो आप नहीं दे रहे हैं उनको। Amongst the positive words to which the reader reacts favorably, some of them are benefit, cordial, happy, generous, loyal, pleasure, thanks, thoughtful, etc. Keep using positive, happy, and cordial words in your communication. That makes the reader feel better rather than using negative words. Amongst the negative words the reader might react favorably to, maybe due to past experience with some words. The words are blame, complaint, failed, fault, regret, reject, trouble, unfair, and many others. All these are negative. Blame, complaint, etc. इन सब के साथ बहुत नेगेटिव कॉनोटेशंस हैं। इन सब के साथ जो रीडर है उसको इतना अच्छा रिएक्शन नहीं होगा अगर उसके ख़त में या किसी प्रपोजल में या कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस में ये ख़त लिखे जाएं। तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि जो पॉजिटिव वर्ड्स थे जिनके साथ रीडर फेवरेबली रिएक्ट करेगा वो इस्तेमाल ज़्यादा किए जाएं और ये नेगेटिव वर्ड्स का इस्तेमाल कम से कम रखा जाए। जाहिर है बहुत सिचुएशंस होंगी जहां आपको नेगेटिव वर्ड इस्तेमाल करने पड़ेंगे और फिर उनको भी ये ख्याल रखा जाए कि जहां वो नेगेटिव वर्ड्स इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं वो बहुत तरीके से हों और उनके साथ बाकी जो टेक्स्ट है वो फिर ज़रा टैक्टफुल हो। So these were some points that we need to keep in mind when we want to write with consideration. Let's briefly have a look at a checklist so that you remember all the points, and then we'll move on to concreteness. For consideration, for considerate writing, you need to make sure that your material is from the reader's point of view. Also, that you is more desirable than I or we in most instances. You need to keep this in mind. You also need to remember that readers like to see these benefits, and you need to be sure that benefits are a prominent part of your message, and also consciously use positive words. If you do all these things, then you are being considerate as a writer. Now, coming to the fourth C of amongst the 7 C's of effective communication, concreteness. Communicating concretely means being specific, definite, and vivid rather than being vague and general. Now, concreteness as we just read on the slide, if you are concrete, if you are vivid, if you are very clear in your message, then your message is concrete. If you are vague and very general in what you are saying, then your message is not concrete. जब आपका मैसेज, अगर आप अपने मैसेज के अंदर ऐसी वोकैबुलरी, ऐसे लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल करेंगे जिनका बहुत ठोस मीनिंग नहीं है, तो आपके मैसेज में भी कोई ठोस बात नहीं होगी. वो बहुत ही वेग लगेगा, बहुत ऐसा लगेगा कि शायद आपको पता नहीं है कि आप क्या कहना चाह रहे हैं और आप इधर उधर की बातें कर रहे हैं. इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप जो भी वोकैबुलरी यूज़ करें, जो भी मैसेज अपने कम्युनिकेशन में देना चाहें, उसको एक ठोस तरीके से आप दें. A lot of the times, misunderstanding of words have produced tragedies, both in war and in peace, and in business and non-business situations. So, if you are vague, then it leads to misunderstandings, and these misunderstandings can lead to large problems or small problems. But whatever the case, vagueness does lead to misunderstandings. So, it is better to be concrete and more precise in what you are saying, so that there are no misunderstandings. Often concreteness means using denotative, direct, explicit, often dictionary-based words rather than connotative words. Denotative words वो होंगे जिनका डायरेक्ट मतलब पढ़ने वाले को पता चल जाएगा. जो डिक्शनरी में अगर वो लफ्ज़ ढूंढे तो उसका वो ही मीनिंग होगा जो मैसेज में आप देना चाह रहे हैं. कॉनोटेटिव वर्ड्स वो होंगे जिनका डिक्शनरी में जो मीनिंग होगा वो शायद आपके पैगाम में वो मीनिंग उसका ना हो. आप कहना कुछ चाह रहे हैं और आप उसके लिए कोई और ऐसे लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं जिसका डायरेक्ट मतलब उसको नहीं, ऑडियंस तक नहीं पहुंच पा रहा. तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप अपने अपना मैसेज को कॉन्क्रीट रखने के लिए आप डिनोटेटिव वर्ड्स यूज़ करें जिनका डायरेक्ट मतलब वही हो जो उनका असल मतलब है. The benefits to business professionals of using concrete facts and figures are that your receiver knows exactly what is desired from them, and also that when you supply specifics to reader, you increase the likelihood that your message will be interpreted the way you intended. जाहिर है जब आप एक बात को ज़्यादा क्लियरली कहेंगे, ज़्यादा ठोस तरीके से कहेंगे, ज़्यादा स्पेसिफिक तरीके से कहेंगे, तो जो चांस है कि उसमें मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग हो वो चांस कम हो जाएगा, और जो चांस है कि आपकी बात मानी जाए और आपकी बात समझी जाए वो चांस बढ़ जाएगा. तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप कॉन्क्रीट वर्ड्स इस्तेमाल करें और अपने कम्युनिकेशन में या लेटर में जो है वो वेगनेस कम रखें. The following guidelines should be followed to compose concrete, convincing messages. You need to use specific facts and figures. You need to put actions to words and use vivid image-building words. Now, using specific facts and figures. It is desirable to be precise and concrete both in written and oral technical communications. जब हम facts and figures की बात करते हैं तो ये technical communication में ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल होते हैं. आम कम्युनिकेशन में हम फिगर्स बहुत कम इस्तेमाल करते हैं. जाहिर है बहुत हम जब आपस में कोई कैजुअल नॉन बिजनेस कम्युनिकेशन कर रहे होते हैं तो उसमें हमें इतने नंबर्स की और इतने फिगर्स की ज़रूरत नहीं होती. लेकिन जब हम टेक्निकल कम्युनिकेशन कर रहे होते हैं तो उसमें बहुत ज़रूरी है कि जो हम फिगर्स दे रहे हों वो प्रिसाइज हों, वो सही हों, और जो हम बात कर रहे हैं उसमें हम जितने ज़्यादा फैक्ट्स और जितने ज़्यादा फिगर्स इस्तेमाल करेंगे, एक तो उससे हमारी नॉलेज का पता चलता है कि हमें इस चीज़ का पता है, लेकिन उससे भी ज़्यादा ज़रूरी उसमें यह है कि जो हमारा मैसेज है वो ज़्यादा कॉन्क्रीट रहता है और जो पढ़ने वाला है उसको बात सही तरीके से पता चल जाती है कि एक्चुअली सिचुएशन है क्या. A vague sentence would be, the students' GMAT scores are higher. A more concrete way of saying this would be, in 1996 the GMAT scores averaged 600, by 1997 they had risen to 610. Now, in the first instance, the vague situation, the students' GMAT scores are higher. Higher than what? Higher than whose GMAT scores? अगर आप कोई चीज़ बता रहे हैं, उसको हाई या लो बता रहे हैं, तो आपको जाहिर है उसमें कुछ फिगर्स, कुछ नंबर्स बताने होंगे ताकि पढ़ने वाले को भी अंदाज़ा हो कि किस चीज़ से हाई है ये स्कोर या किस चीज़ से लो है. तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप उसमें ज़्यादा कॉन्क्रीट जितनी भी आपके पास इंफॉर्मेशन है आप उसको एक कंसाइज तरीके से बताएं. फैक्ट्स एंड फिगर्स देने का मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप अपने सेंटेंसेस खामखा में लंबे करें. आपने जाहिर है उसमें कंसाइसनेस भी रखनी है, जो हमने पहले हम पिछले लेक्चर में बात कर चुके हैं, लेकिन आपने उसमें ठोस बात भी करनी है. Another example would be Eastern Europe is making progress in obtaining investment. Now, this is a very correct statement if you say that this company or this country is getting more investment. But it's not very concrete. It does not give any countries within, in this example, it does not give any countries within Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe के कौन से मुल्कों में इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ रही है, कितनी इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ी है, किन सेक्टर्स में इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ी है, ये कोई बातें इस मैसेज में नहीं कम्युनिकेट हो रही. A better way would be in 1990 the investment in Eastern Europe was $30 million. Today that figure has increased by 12%. Okay, so here again you are comparing, you are contrasting with what was before and what is now, and you're also giving figures. Another vague example would be she's a brain. Now this sounds very casual and it's obviously very vague, but it sounds very casual and it also sounds a bit slangy. बहुत slang लगता है ये, तो इसलिए इसको ज़्यादा concrete, precise तरीका कहने का होगा. Her grade point average in 1996 was 3.9 on a 4-point scale. This shows, जाहिर है अगर किसी का 3.9 GPA है out of 4, तो वो बहुत ही इंटेलिजेंट होंगे, वो बहुत, उनका दिमाग सचमुच बहुत अच्छा होगा. लेकिन खाली शी इज़ अ ब्रेन या शी इज़ वेरी ब्रेनी कहने के बजाय जब आप उसको इस तरीके से कहेंगे, फैक्ट्स और फिगर्स देके, तो वो ज़्यादा क्लियरली पता चलता है कि वो सचमुच कितने इंटेलिजेंट हैं. There are, however, some exceptions to the facts and figures rule. When it is not possible to be specific, you may not have precise facts and figures, so it might not be possible for you to be specific. You may also not wish to use facts and figures when you wish to be diplomatic. Instead of saying something harsh like, you have missed 3 invitations to my office, you may be more tactful by saying, I've sent you several reminders to see me in my office. Now, basically, instead of using the figure of 3, you're just saying several. That's really the only difference. But it's because you might not want to pinpoint exactly how many times you invited that person or you summoned that person to your office and exactly how many times they refused to come. So instead of saying something harsh, you just wrap it in a more tactful word, and the message, it's the same message that goes across. Also, you might not want to use figures when exact figures are unimportant. A lot of the times it's not very important to give exactly what the figure is. If you're saying something like, in this example, more than half the committee was present, it might be enough because the reader knows what the full number of people on the committee was. And also it's not important if the committee was 10 people and 5 were present, or if it was 20 people and 10 were present. What's important is that there was a 50% attendance, okay, or that half the people were there and half the people were not there. So in that sense, then it might not be very important to use a direct figure here. You need to show concreteness, you need to also put action in your verbs. You need to use active rather than passive verbs, and put action in your verbs rather than in your nouns and infinitives. जब आप active voice में बात करेंगे तो वो ज़्यादा direct है और वो ज़्यादा concrete लगती है. जब आप अपने verbs में जो doing words हैं आप उनमें action डालेंगे तो वो ज़्यादा clear message आता है, बजाय इसके कि आप nouns में action डालें. और हम अभी इसके examples देखेंगे तो ज़्यादा clarify भी हो जाएगा. Using the active voice. A passive verb has 3 characteristics. The subject does not do the acting in the sentence. Also, the verb consists of 2 or more words, for example, to be. And number 3, the word by is expressed or implied, by whom, etc. Okay, let's have a look. For example, in a passive voice sentence where the subject receives the action, the tests were administered by the professors. Okay, here the action is it's the subject who is receiving the action. Okay, the tests were administered by whom? By the professors. The active way of saying the same thing would be the professors administered the test. Here it is the subject who is performing the action. It is not an action which is being received by the subject, but an action which is being taken by the subject. It is more direct, it is more active. It's the professor who is in control of the situation. So, another example where the subject receives the action would be, The grades of the students will be sent to you by the school. The active way of saying this would be much more direct, where the subject is performing the action. The school will send students their grades. Okay, this is much more direct because it's the active voice and it's much clearer. The use of active verbs makes the sentences more specific. For example, the dean decided is more specific than a decision has been made. It makes the sentences more personal. You will note is both personal and specific rather than it will be noted. Active verbs also make sentences more concise. The figures show as compared to it is shown by the figures. And they make sentences more emphatic. They give more emphasis to the subject. It makes the sentences more concise. Figures show as compared to it is shown by the figures. Also, they make the sentences more emphatic. It gives more emphasis to the sentences. The students held a contest gives more emphasis to the subject as compared to a contest was held by the students. Okay, so all these things obviously make your communication clearer, more effective, more concrete rather than being vague by using passive voice. Also, when you want to avoid personal blunt accusations, you use passive voice. Earlier we looked at active voice and how to make your communication direct, but there are times when you don't want to be so direct, and especially when it might being direct might seem that you are being blunt and that you are making an accusation there, and also when it might seem that you're giving a negative message. There it might be better to use passive voice. For example, the October check was not included is more tactful than saying you failed to include the October check, because again in this, first by the use of you're giving emphasis to the subject, to the receiver, and thereby you are accusing the receiver of not including the check. Okay, तो इसलिए बेहतर है कि आप इस टाइप केस में आप पैसिव वॉइस इस्तेमाल कर लें ताकि जो रिसीवर है या जो रीडर है उसके ऊपर ब्लेम ना जाए. Also, attendance at the meeting is required is less hard than you must attend the meeting. By saying attendance at the meeting is required by all employees, you are basically you are including the reader as a group instead of pointing out to the reader, and also you are using the passive voice, giving a notice, but you're not giving a direct order. Also, when you want to stress the object of the action, you would use passive voice instead of active voice. You are invited is much better than we invite you, because here you want to give the emphasis on you rather than we. Your savings account is insured up to something, up to 100,000 rupees. In this, you have intentionally stressed your savings account rather than we have insured your account. You will also put actions in verbs, not in nouns, to make your message more concrete. A lot of the times, the action can be hiding in a quiet noun. For example, Professor Saima Shirazi will give consideration to the report. Here, the action of giving consideration is not directly stated because consideration, the verb, has been included in the noun, or the verb of consider has been included in the noun of consideration. Okay? It would be better to say Professor Saima Shirazi will consider the report. This is more direct. And the action is very obvious. For example, you can have an action hiding in an infinitive. The duty of the secretary is to check all the incoming mail and to record it. The action in verb would be the secretary checks all the incoming mail and records it. You will also use vivid image building words to make your message more complete. And you can make your message forceful by using comparisons, sensory appeals, figurative language, concrete nouns, and well-chosen adjectives. Comparisons can be, for example, a bland image would be, this is a long letter. Here, there is no real comparison and it is a very bland statement. A more vivid image would be, this letter is 3 times as long as you said it would be. This actually gives you an idea of exactly how long a letter it is from what the intention was. Okay, so इसलिए ज़रा सा आपने उसको concrete कर दिया, ज़रा सा उसमें आपने clarify किया, compare किया, तो वो जो image है वो बेहतर हो गया reader के mind में. Using figurative language, literally would be her work in groups was exemplary, and figurative language would be she could be called the spark plug of the group. Okay, by saying this, you are giving making an image, and you are making your the image more concrete, and you're making your message more concrete. Now, at the end, a quick checklist. Let's see if you have got all the points of concreteness, and when you finish writing your messages, it would be good to have a look at this checklist as well. You need to check if you were precise in using facts and figures whenever possible. कोई गलती तो नहीं हुई आपके फिगर्स में, आपके फैक्ट्स में, कोई ये ऐसे तो नहीं हुआ कि जो आपके फिगर्स थे वो आपने गलत उनको बयान कर दिया हो. Did you use active voice more than passive? Is there action in verbs rather than in nouns? And also, did you try occasionally to use vivid image building words? But in business writing, remember, use them sparingly. You do not want to use image building words and vivid vocabulary too much in business writing. In this lesson, we have looked at 2 more C's of the 7 C's of effective communication. We've looked at concreteness and we've looked at consideration. And we will complete this in the following lectures. That's all for this lesson for today. Allah Hafiz.